Due to the graphic nature of this program, viewer discretion is advised.
Every evening, Kathy Gallen and her husband and their baby daughter leave their maisonette home and spend the night sleeping on the floor of a relative's house. They're too frightened to stay in their maisonette. They sincerely believe that it's haunted. Daylight brings little relief for the 12 families living in this block on a new council estate at Battle Hill near Newcastle. Their lives have been made a misery since they moved here 6 months ago.
Well, when we first moved in about 6 months ago, we heard all these noises, the banging and footsteps, etc. And we put it down to the newness of the house, you know, the central heating working through. And then we put it down to people not having carpets down. And it got so bad, it kept waking Kimberly up at night. So at the finish, I had a word with one of the girls upstairs and asked them, you know, what the noise was. And she said they had been having it coming from upstairs to them. Well, there's nobody, you know, above them. So, of course, we just all got together and found out that it must be something, you know. And they had a priest in because they thought it was a spirit. Now, at first, I thought this was ludicrous because I don't believe in things like that. But then things started getting worse and worse, and you could hear nothing but footsteps, you know, going up and down the stairs and across the bedroom floor, along the passageway, and you could be lying in bed and you could hear it walk to your bedroom door and then it would just stop.
We was lying in bed, we heard this banging on the cot, and we both looked up and she was kind of going up and down, and I rushed out of bed and put the light on and she was just sound asleep.
Did it seem like somebody was sort of shaking her or moving her?
You know, picking it up and down.
The cot was really banging, thudding the cot. I was scared out of my wits. There was one particular night we put the central heating on. It takes approximately 10 minutes for the whole house to get really warm through. After 10-15 minutes, I went upstairs, and in our bedroom, which is directly above us, it was really icy cold, and put my hand down by the ducket where the warm air is blown out. It was blowing red hot, but yet the room was icy cold.
At first, Mr. Taylor was sceptical about the noises. What convinced him that something strange was going on was an incident with his golf clubs.
I was sat down watching television in the living room. I heard such a thud on the ceiling. I rushed upstairs, and the golf balls were scattered individually all over the bedroom. Well, as you know yourself, if something falls over, they're going to stay in a bunch, something like that.
Yeah. Now, what did you see when you walked in?
Well, when I walked in the room, there was an iron on the bed. There was putters down there. This pocket zips up. There was balls over there. There was a wood hanging out the door. There was just another wood, something halfway out the bag.
Now tell me, did you have these red things in?
Yes.
It's just like that?
Yeah.
So if you've got to actually physically pick it up, haven't you, like that, to get them out?
Yes.
What were your feelings about that?
I was scared out of my mind. This is when I started believing in something. I was scared out of my mind. I just rushed downstairs and left everything.
Most of the people who live here are young couples. In some cases, the maisonettes are their first home. They're mainly down-to-earth northern folk and not the kind of people who normally dabble in spiritualism or who easily believe ghost stories. But after several weeks, the noises spread to other flats.
We heard it walking from the back bedroom into the front bedroom, turned round and come down the stairs, and then went back up again.
What did you do?
Well, we just sat there. We were too frightened, you know, to do anything.
Did you go upstairs to see if someone was in your house?
Well, we have done before, and even my husband's frightened to go up on his own, and we both went up together. And when we went up, there was nothing there. And I says, is anybody there? And there was nothing. And the footsteps were plain as anything. I mean, you know it when it's in your own house.
The noises spread to the Gallen family and to 10 of the 12 maisonettes. And this couple believe they've experienced other unnatural phenomena too.
Well, just that the baby, you know, was lifted out the cot. Well, we had put her upstairs to bed, you know. Yeah. It was about 11:30, and we went up the stairs, and she was sitting at the top of the stairs, half asleep.
Could she have climbed out of the cot on her own?
No, because she was just crawling, you know, she wasn't walking or anything.
The fear of these people is genuine. Apart from complaining to the council, they've contacted local ministers to help, and a number of them have visited the flats. So what can you make of it all? Well, I personally don't believe in ghosts, but there's no doubt in my mind that the fear of these people is quite genuine. Now, for one night, we're going to try an experiment. This is the room where it's said most of the footsteps come from, and it's pretty secure. The door's locked. In fact, the key's even broken off. The windows are secure. And we've got this apparatus. This is a special camera, and it takes one picture every 10 seconds, and we're going to keep it on right through the night. So if anything natural or unnatural arrives, then we hope to put it on film. We've got some recording equipment so that if we hear anything strange, then we'll switch it on and try and get a tape of it. There's nothing above here, just the roof of the whole masonette block. The family have left, as they have done every night for the past week. So there's just us, myself and the technicians who are recording this film, to try and find out over the next 8 hours what really is behind this strange affair. Well, good morning. We didn't hear anything. The sound didn't pick up anything. And the camera took a picture of this room. That still doesn't necessarily explain what happened. And in fact, you've still got to consider the fear of the people who live here. Apart from me, we had also staying in the house to operate the gear, and in fact to record what I'm saying now, our own nationwide film crew. And one of our technicians, Peter, can I just ask you if you can come in, who records the sound of my voice as I'm speaking to you now and also operated the sound equipment we used, has got one possibility that could alleviate the fear of the people who live here to a certain degree. Peter, what's strange about this house from your point of view?
Well, it's a very live structure. It's floated on a raft, I suspect, because it's built over an old coal mine, apparently. The whole building is a plasterboard and plaster construction, and it acts, if you like a mechanical amplifier. Noises in the lobby outside or downstairs can be transmitted. In addition to that, as if that wasn't enough, it's got a ducted warm air heating system, and that means that noise can be transmitted from one room to another, certainly within a flat. I would suspect, though I don't know how the system works, that it could be transmitted from one flat to another.
On your equipment here, on the sound recording equipment, every little sound is registered, isn't it? So it's very ultra-sensitive, the whole place, to sound.
Last night, while people were going to bed, there was a considerable amount of background noise from this room. Nothing as loud as footsteps in the room. I had 2 microphones out, one near the floor and one in the room space to try and check where the sound was coming from. But a considerable number of noises that would have caused me some alarm if I were living in this room, that were coming from other people in other flats just around. People who were leaving down the back stairs and making a clatter and a noise.
That, of course, is just one possibility. It doesn't explain the golf clubs. It doesn't explain a lot of things. Nevertheless, it's something that perhaps the local council might consider when it's dealing with the complaints by these people.
I couldn't live here much longer with it like this. It's so bad.
Have you ever left your home?
Yes. We went to stay at my mother's because it was so bad. The baby won't go to sleep. She used to go in her cot early at night till the morning, and that was it. We can't get her to bed now till we go. She won't sleep in her cot. She has to sleep with us.
Hello. In these days of booming Britain, it's easy to forget that industrialization has had its failures as well as its successes. And some places have fallen by the wayside in the race towards prosperity and the good life. This is one of them. It's called Deva, what there is of it. But prosperity has passed this way, for Deva has known bonanza. Once people came from all over the country to share in its riches. And today, look at it. Exactly a century ago, it was at its peak. 800 miners worked here. And Deva had this church and 2 chapels, 3 inns, a school, many houses, and hundreds of well-to-do residents. And today, there are just 7 houses and 12 people living here. Most of them are over 70. The youngest resident is over 30. There are no children. So, take a look at Deva and remember, Success is a passing thing. It's hard to see any signs of a flourishing past in Deliver today, for all the mill machinery was dismantled and carried away, along with what the remaining locals proudly recall was the second biggest water wheel in Britain. Soon after, the people went, and their warm little homes on the mountainside began to crumble. The church, 100 years old, still stands, but it creaks with decay, hanging plaster and dropping slates, rotting Bibles and prayer books. And last August, someone came along and stole the church's big brass bell, stamped 1853 and weighing nearly 100 weight. That was the death knell. Good morning, Mr. Richards.
Good morning, sir.
If I can interrupt you for a bit.
Oh, it's quite all right, sir.
You were born here in Deliver,
Yes,
I believe.
I was born here. Yes, 61 years ago.
What was the town, the village? Well, I suppose it was a village even then. What was it like in those rich days?
Oh, it was full of life here. They were paying the miners every month. And there was a big fair here. They were taking stuff from Llanidlos up here and Machynlleth. And the cobblers of Llanbrynmair were bringing the boots up for the miners. And there's another old chap from Machynlleth. He was selling the miners' hats. And I remember it was poor times when I was a boy. When I was a boy of 11 to 12, very poor in the village here. I remember the old women going out in the bogs. And they were gathering rushes. And they used to peel them at night. And I used to peel them with them. And they used to sell them 80 rush candles for a penny. And I remember when I was young in the old days, we used to have concerts, Steddfod's, in the chapels here. And, we used to go to the houses in parties now and have a good talk, hearing the old miners talking about the dangers they'd been underground in the Deliver mine here.
I'm told that in those days there were women working among the 800 miners in the mine here.
Oh, yes. There were 80 women here when the mine was at its peak. And the wages, they were working 12 hours. And the wages were 4 pence, 6 pence, and 8 pence a day.
And what did the men get?
The best miner, his wages was 15 shillings a week. Then they had young boys down the mine here, turning the ventilators. And they used to pay them something like 12 bob a week. And they were down 12 hours down on the ground. And we used to play on the old hills here. And many a time my parents used to tell me, don't you go over the Pendley side, it's dangerous.
Where's that?
That side, where old Sean the Go was hanged. John the blacksmith. He was hanged on the top there.
Was he?
Quite, well, opposite us now here.
Yes.
He murdered his wife and 2 children. He threw them down the bodies to an old shaft. And after many, many days, the miners found them. Old John the blacksmith was taken to Welshpool to stand his trial. And they condemned him to death. They brought him back on a white horse, right up to the gallows. And they hanged him there. And in 1937, to prove that the story was true, me and another fellow, a buddy of mine that used to work in the mine with me, Mr. Ivan Gwilym Davis, is living at the Van Mines now.
Mm-hmm.
We went there and we digged it up. It was only buried in...
Digged what up?
A skull in an iron cage. He was a blacksmith, you see. And the people used to say that he had to do the iron frame to put on his own head for hanging him. And there was a steel collar which you could adjust. And he was hung there. I think he was hung somewhere around 1716 on the 11th of April.
And you found the skull
I
in
found
the
the
iron
skull
collar?
in the iron collar. And I think it's in St. Fagans now. And that proved that the story was true. But all people used to see a lot of ghosts around here.
Have you ever seen one?
No, never. No.
Do you believe that there are ghosts?
Yes, I do believe. I do believe in ghosts. because my father told me he was a young man and he was going courting one time, past the Star Inn here, him and another fellow. The miner was working then. And as they were close to the church, of course it was dark, you know, they could see a little light coming up the road, just hobbing along, blue little flame. And it passed them. And it went straight into the mine's office. And from the office, it came out, and it went up over the old road, over the top of the hill. And now, in about a couple of weeks, a miner was drowned in the mine here. The mine was flooded. There was a big storm, you know, and the water cut into the mine. And now, as they were lowering the cages, there were 5 men, I think, in the cage going down. The cage went into the water. And the engine driver thought there was something wrong, you see. He took the cage up a bit. No, he left the cage in the water. But these other fellows, they opened the top of the cage and they came out on the top and they had their heads out of the water. There was a level opposite them. But this man that was drowned, he jumped into this level. Because this level is going uphill and he thought if he could go along a few yards, he'd be safe. But he was drowned. So they kept the pumps going for about a week or more. I'm not quite sure, but I know it was over a week. And they had the coffin, you see. The coffin came up the bottom road into the office, and then it was left there till they had the body. Then they brought the body out, put him in the coffin, and took him back over the mountain road to a place called Udaviti. And that was the last fatal accident after the Lever mine. That was somewhere about the 1890s.
Mr. Richards, I have enjoyed meeting you. Thank you very much for sparing the time. And I know you've got 2 more miles to do.
Yes, another 2 miles.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
The Long Beach Battalion of the Grenadier Guards arrives for the changing of the guard.
Queen's Guards! Halt! Left hand! Old guard just to the right. Dress! Eyes front! Queen's Guards! General salute! Praise and arms!
These must be the world's most confused American tourists. In the middle of middle-class California, an elaborate marketing operation is underway to convince them that they're really in the heart of elegant upper-class England. It's a last desperate bid by the city of Long Beach to convince the tourists and the city fathers that the $63 million they've spent transporting and transforming a pile of British scrap may actually have been worth it. For 10 years, the Queen Mary has hung like a huge, undignified British albatross around the necks of the Long Beach taxpayers. Until now.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is May. I'd like to welcome you aboard the ship, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about your tour and about what you'll be seeing today.
Step right on in and down to the end of the walkway there.
Last year, nearly 1 million visitors wallowed briefly in the vicarious elegance of a way of life that has passed forever.
This is a first-class suite. A suite like this consisted of 4 rooms, starting with the sleeping room that you just came through, your setting room, restroom facilities, and a room in which you could store your luggage. And that was just so you wouldn't have to look at your trunks and your suitcases sitting around the suite everywhere.
Already, the number of visitors exceeds by 4 or 5 times the number of passengers the ship carried in 30 years of plying the Atlantic.
The maids' quarters, by the way, cost you an extra $750 round trip. And I know that sounds a little bit expensive, but so was the price of a first-class suite. You see, they started at $5,000 and went all the way up to about $7,500. And so if you could afford the price of the suite, I'm sure you could afford the price of bringing the maid.
The Queen Mary has 3 bow anchors, Two of them are still intact on either side of the ship.
In a couple of years, the Queen Mary may finally begin to make money for Long Beach. This year, operating losses are down, visitors are up, thanks to the peculiar talent and obsession of one of America's most extraordinary civil servants, Director of the Queen Mary Department, Marvin Wolfe.
We did it essentially by changing three things. One, the product itself, which we consider to be the Queen Mary, finest ship that was ever built, the most luxurious, most beautiful transatlantic ocean liner that's ever been constructed by man. By taking that and showing it for what it really is, the beautiful lady. By taking that and adding to it a level of entertainment that people expect in a Southern California facility. And third, letting people know about it by marketing it aggressively.
1, 2, 3. Consider yourself at home. Hello, consider yourself part of the family. We've taken to you so strong. It's clear we're going to get along.
The Queen Mary today, since its arrival in Long Beach, each year has had more people aboard than it did during its entire lifetime at sea. It has brought more information, more pleasure, more educational information to the visiting public than anyone ever could have imagined. We have our school children coming down here, not by hundreds and not by thousands, by the tens of thousands on special tours every year. They're learning about the ship as a transportation element. They're learning about it as a historical figure.
But you expect a ship to have a crew, to go to sea, and here it is, surrounded by a little wall in the middle of Long Beach, California.
Well, the only part that you mentioned that does not take place is going to sea. Except in my dreams, obviously, because I would love to see it go to sea. We often term it as a royal experience, a touch of royalty, and not in the sense, naturally, of being in touch with the royal family, but it's just a different type of royalty. The Queen Mary was known as one of the great queens of the Atlantic. North Atlantic queens have been described over and over again, but in every description by every expert in the fields of things nautical, they've always described the Queen Mary as truly the Queen of Queens. And I think it's that image of royalty that they come to see, and they come away with the feeling of having experienced something that can only be felt when you're in the presence of royalty. When you walk across the deck and you go through an area where perhaps Churchill and Eisenhower and people like that stood and walked, where you can go through the history of a ship that went from the deepest depression during the 30s to a time in the 60s when men were speaking to each other from the earth to the moon. It spans a generation gap and more, and it's a time machine. And many people come here because they want to go back in time. And what they're really looking for is a glimpse of themselves and their forefathers, perhaps. When they come aboard and they stop and they look around and they say, gee, does this thing really float? Will it really move? And how do you do it?
However you look at it, the Queen Mary today is a ghost ship. Marvin Wolfe may be making it work because his business is fantasy, and the Queen Mary is dream. You're a bit of a nutter about it, really, aren't you?
Oh, yes. I think that I have an affection for the ship, as do most of us, that is rarely found in anyone working in an office building.
This is just a quick reminder to subscribe. You'll be notified every time we upload new and fascinating content. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button. These are an immense help to our channel. Thanks, guys.
They call this the biggest village in England. And if you do want to have a wild time in Sheffield after dark, for a long time now, there hasn't been very much on offer. But in recent years, things have been looking up. And now there really is rather more to Sheffield after hours than just sixpenn'orth of chips. There's a real live, full-blooded nightclub. It's got a go-go room, just the place for shaking off the Sheffield blues.
It's got a restaurant for long meals and a steak bar for short ones. It's got a casino and a substantial membership. And it's also got a ghost.
A brick through the window is the least of the problems facing the firm refitting 82 Richmond Road, Kingston. They say there have been unforeseen delays. Builders' promises, you might think. But in this case, there does seem to be a reason. The place is haunted. A ladder placed against that first floor window started to vibrate violently and then crashed to the ground. The man on it is in hospital. And a mysterious name appeared on one of the workmen's toolboxes, and an object from that toolbox disappeared. It'll hardly surprise you to learn that that object was a spirit level.
I've seen this young fella here dragged across the cellar floor by unforeseen hands. Not kicking himself across, dragged across. I'll admit I stood there, tears were running out my eyes watching it. And he was screaming,
With laughter?
I was, yeah. Tears were running out of my eyes. I couldn't stop laughing at it because he was being dragged across the cellar floor with his arms, out backwards.
Skeptics have somewhat unkindly noted that the first appearance of this troublesome ghost was coincidental with the approach of the date originally set for the completion of the work.
At the moment, I'm beginning to now think that I'm now in the region of losing somewhere around about £1,000 over this. And as I say, at this present moment in time, it now ceases to be quite funny. And I've now obviously got clients breathing down my neck. And when I go back to them and tell them that there's a poltergeist or a ghost here, I mean, it seems to be quite a joke.
But is he calling a spade, or is it hot air? Perhaps the only man who can decide is a building inspector. Spectre.
1,000 years ago, the locals will tell you, there was a thriving city on this spot. Where there is now little but grass and sand dunes, there was once a river, a port and a castle. The sea and the ships that sailed on it brought wealth and prosperity. But it also brought the Vikings. The Black Pagans, as they were called, sacked and burnt the city of Kenfig 8 times. And when they left, the sea also brought the sand, filling the river, drifting into the streets and houses, gradually burying everything. Today, there is nothing left of it but a memory. Well, not quite, for hard by Kenfig Pool there is a pub, the Prince of Wales, once the Guildhall of Kenfig, and by all accounts the pub is haunted, not by a figure, but by a sound. For years, the landlords and patrons of the Prince of Wales have discussed strange tales of how, in the dead of night, there emerge from the very walls of the pub itself the sounds of voices, hesitant footsteps, and the eerie playing of an organ. Then, one of the regulars, an industrial chemist named Alan Jenkins, who specialises in mineral crystallography, began discussing it with John Mark, a local electrical engineer. They wondered if some chemical element in the walls had allowed them to record sounds from the past.
If you examine the chemical structure of the rocks of the pub is made of, the silica rocks, there is a certain amount of limestone here, but which is not valid. The silica and the iron cement that binds the silica together could act as a magnetic tape, a recording tape, or a low-grade microchip. So we argued that possibly the walls could absorb sound and give it back out, and therefore give the pub atmosphere.
I suggested to Alan, the chemist, that perhaps we could activate the electrons in the wall by passing in electric charge. And in fact, what we set up was a transformer to put into the wall at various frequencies a charge of between 18,000 and 20,000 volts.
So, for the past 2 months, as night closes in, the pair have lugged their equipment up the stairs leading to the old meeting room above the pub. which seems to be the source of most of the unexplained phenomena. The electrodes to carry the voltage are attached to the wall, and the microphone is set in position. A time switch on the power is set to switch on the tape recorder between 1 and 4 in the morning, when most natural noises have ceased. Then the men leave, and the room is locked. After 70 hours of recording, these are some of the unexplained sounds that have been registered on their tapes.
Quite frankly, when we heard the tapes, I was frightened. Frightened. Because this is a very ancient room. The affairs of the community are being conducted for the last 700 years, I suppose. People have been imprisoned and I think hung. There is a court list on the wall of sentences that have been pronounced in this very room. It's been a centre of the political, social activities of this community for many hundreds of years. It is possible that some of the past could be recorded, but it has to be proved.
What we've heard so far is very difficult to dismiss the supernatural. Although we don't want to involve the supernatural, it's very, very difficult to dismiss it.
The supernatural, the silicates, or a hoax? The men themselves aren't sure. But now a firm of electrical engineers from Yorkshire has agreed to provide the equipment to establish whether or not they have really recorded sounds from the past. If the experiment is successful, the implications are considerable. What, one wonders, would the walls of the Parthenon or the Roman Forum say to us, if only we fed enough volts through them?
If you're a bit unsettled by that, you'll be unsettled too by the weather tomorrow, I'm afraid.
Number 88 Frondher Street, Swansea, is a pretty ordinary-looking house from the outside. But on the inside this week, some most extraordinary things have been going on. Bottles flying through the air, furniture being overturned. And the young woman who lives here with her husband and her 2 children, one aged 4 and one not yet 2, is Mrs. Marcia Howells, aged 20. Now, after yesterday's extraordinary goings-on, she moved out last night, but she came back today to help Swansea detectives to try to solve this really baffling mystery. What happened on Monday?
Well, my little girl just went in my mother's room to have a cup of tea. My mother was just going over the shop, and as she was just opening the door to go out, I walked to the back kitchen. As I opened the door, I seen this bottle rise and just throw itself at me. I shut the door to protect myself, and I opened it again, and I seen another bottle. With that, I just picked up the children and ran out the street, and my husband was coming down the street, so I told him, and he ran in the house, and in that couple of seconds, the living room was upside down.
What kind of time of night was this?
This was about 4:45. The bottle started flying, you know.
What happened on Wednesday?
Well, I'd just gone up to school to fetch my little girl, and my mother heard this noise. She went out the back kitchen. She couldn't open the door because the couch and everything was jammed against it. She came out here and waited for me to come home. When I came home, I went in. Everything was turned upside down. And I went upstairs, the bedroom, the little baby's cot was in under my bed and everything. There was nothing out the back kitchen. The back kitchen was all right.
Well, how are you sure that it couldn't have been done by someone trying to upset you?
Well, it's possible because even the police, they couldn't get in through the bedroom door. They had to break in. Well, if there was anybody in the bedroom, how could they get out of the bedroom into the back kitchen? to disturb that because the bedroom was done before the back kitchen.
How long have you lived here?
Well, it's not quite a year yet.
And you're buying the house on mortgage?
That's right.
What are you doing about this situation now?
Well, I don't know what to do. We've moved over my sister in Rosehill Terrace, but I can't always stay there, and I won't come back here. Not that I'm afraid, it's just that, well, if my little boy had been in that cot, he would have been killed.
Have you been to see a priest about this situation?
Yes, we've been to see a priest. He'll be coming up tomorrow morning.
In the hope of exorcising this ghost?
That's right, yes.
Rock and roll, we're told, is fading out, and skiffle has had its day. So, what is going to happen to the hundreds of thousands of guitars which have been in action around the country in the last few years? One of these unemployment problems, we learned today, has been solved in a most ingenious way by the guitar itself. For this guitar, when it isn't playing rock and roll or skiffle, simply plays what it chooses. And to date, it's gone in for plenty of variety on any wavelength. Police messages, Radio Moscow, the third program, a weather report from New Zealand, radio hams chatting, even chamber music. And the owner, who's played at by his own guitar, is Mr. Brian Senior, and he's in our Manchester studio. Well, Mr. Senior, what's it playing tonight?
Well, at the moment, nothing.
You haven't been able to tune in?
No, I'm afraid not. Not yet.
Now, you sure this isn't something you're just hearing in your own head? It really is playing at you?
Well, I'm fairly sure of it, seeing as about 200 other people have heard it as well.
Goodness me. Now, how far away does it go for its programs?
Australia, New Zealand, any country you like to name.
I hear you've heard Radio Moscow.
Yes, that's right.
How did you know it was Radio Moscow today?
Because every 4 or 5 words, all through the speech, it was Nikola Khrushchev did this, Nikola Khrushchev did that, and they were praising him up to the skies.
I see. Of course, it could have been the 9 o'clock news, I suppose, at times, but... Mr. Senior, has your guitar picked up anything that you feel perhaps it ought not to have heard?
Police messages. I know you can get into trouble for these, but I've no option. If they want to come on, they come on.
Well, what has it overheard?
Well, it's overheard police cars being told to get somewhere quick, and also there's a wide load going through Doncaster, and the policeman in the car was playing war because the traffic lights were holding him up.
Now, have you discovered how it all happens?
No, I'm afraid not.
But have you asked anyone to try and find out for you?
Yes, we've had radio hams and experts in, and they can't find the trace for it.
Well, what do you think it is?
Now you're asking.
Well, now, when it is picking up messages from outer space, can you select your own program? I mean, have you got one string for the light program and another one for the third?
I wish I had. It's worth a fortune.
But does it, in fact, play what it wants to? You can't choose anything?
No, I can't choose. If it wants to come on, it comes on.
So if you want to play rock and roll and it has other ideas, like a little Mozart, you get Mozart?
I get Mozart, that's it.
Incidentally, have you got a license for that thing?
No.
A brick through the window is the least of the problems facing the firm refitting 82 Richmond Road, Kingston. They say there have been unforeseen delays. Builders' promises, you might think. But in this case, there does seem to be a reason. The place is haunted. A man working in an empty room was struck in the back by a piece of flying metal bar. There have been light bulbs falling. There have been nails flying across the room and shovels falling downstairs. A ladder placed against that first floor window started to vibrate violently and then crashed to the ground. The man on it is in hospital. And a mysterious name appeared on one of the workmen's toolboxes, and an object from that toolbox disappeared. It'll hardly surprise you to learn that that object was a spirit level.
Considering it's their first brush with the occult, the survivors, Chris, Bill, Harvey and Fred, are commendably calm. And there's nothing fey about any one of them. Indeed, they manifest a remarkable solidarity.
I've seen this young fella here dragged across the cellar floor by unforeseen hands. Not kicking himself across, dragged across. I'll admit I stood there, tears were running out my eyes watching it. And he was screaming,
with laughter.
I was, yeah. Tears were running out my eyes. I couldn't stop laughing at it because he was being dragged across the cellar floor with his arms, out backwards.
What about this fella on a ladder?
That's the window cleaner guy.
What happened to him?
Well, he's told people at the hospital and other people that he was actually pushed. And he made a grab for a window frame and it came away in his hands.
Do you believe any of this stuff?
Certainly do, yes.
What have you seen?
Well, I've seen the steps up in the attic there, being pulled out underneath.
Nobody there at all?
Nobody there at all whatsoever.
Couldn't it have been one of your mates?
No, nobody moved.
I was down the cell at the time, and 5 of us stood in the cell, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden, a piece of floorboard came up, 6 to 1, you know, and struck me across the face. Nearly broke my nose, actually, you know.
Skeptics have somewhat unkindly noted that the first appearance of this troublesome ghost was coincidental with the approach of the date originally set for the completion of the work. Happily, corroborative testimony can be obtained from a quite independent source, neighbour Margaret Rushforth.
The workmen came running along the road here in a state of panic and said, could I help them? There were things flying about as they worked in that place. And he had a cut on his hand, which he said a piece of wood had flown through the air and cut his hand.
The first carpenter that they had on the site, and there have been 3 now, decided that he knew where the problem lay. He decided that the biggest problem was in the smallest room. Chris, tell me exactly what happened here.
Well, he was working in here, and all of a sudden he ran down to the tobacconist, a few doors along. He went running in for a choc ice.
A choc ice?
A choc ice, yeah. Anyway, he just asked for the choc ice, come running back, and we found him in here feeding it to this toilet. And when we said to him, you know, what are you doing that for? He turned around and said, because Albert told me so.
And did it have any effect?
Well, a couple of days later he went screaming down the road and he never returned, and he left his toolbox behind. He wouldn't take it home with him in case Albert jumped inside and went home with him.
And did Albert continue to be here?
He's been here all the time. He goes quiet for a couple of days and he starts again.
Why did he give him a choc ice?
Well, that I can't tell you. I suppose he liked choc ices.
Anxious to finish the job, the men decided that if he could not be ignored, Albert, or Michael, the name is immaterial, must be placated.
I stayed halfway up the building and asked the men to join me in this little healing service. And it was while I was saying those prayers that I became aware of a very agitated soul who was in that building, a soul that hadn't cleared the barrier to the other world as they should have done. And they were agitated, they were shaking, and I shook with their conditions. And I asked for healing and for safe conduct for that soul to go across the barrier where they properly belong.
But in vain. It seemed that once again they were destined to meet their old enemy instead of their new deadline. Even managing director Ron Stocks is at a loss.
At the moment, I'm beginning to now think that I'm now in the region of losing somewhere around about £1,000 over this. And as I say, at this present moment in time, it now ceases to be quite funny. And I've now obviously got clients breathing down my neck. And when I go back to them and tell them that there's a poltergeist or a ghost here, I mean, it seems to be quite a joke.
But is he calling a spade, or is it hot air? Perhaps the only man who can decide is a building inspector. Spectre.
This is the Brunswick Restaurant. You won't find it in Raymond Postgate, but if there was a Raymond Ghost Pate, you might find it in there, for this is Brighton's only haunted restaurant. Dining in here can be a rather nervous experience, full of ghosties and gourmets and things that go burp in the night. Mike Wilde has, for the last 6 months, been chef proprietor of the Brunswick Restaurant. Trained by a pupil of the great Escoffier and once chef to the entire film crew of Moby Dick, he is well able to cope with Brighton's mortal appetite. But while most of the Brunswick's visitors are well behaved, one is the kind of diner every restaurant can do without.
One of the very earliest things that happened was that this frying pan would, if I turned away from the trolley to fetch brandy for flambeing, would gently, very gently, slide away and travel for about 3 foot under the table or down to one side.
While the contents were on fire?
While the contents were on fire.
Heavens. How often did that happen?
Between 6 and 8 times.
Happens a lot.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yes, we had...
Can we get this out of the way? Perhaps it'll go by itself.
It wouldn't be the first time. This is all that's left out of 3 dozen of these in the 6 months. Mm-hmm. They take off from the back of the board here.
Just by themselves?
By themselves.
Yep.
One actually took off from underneath a cup and left the cup behind.
The cup stayed behind, the saucer jumped off and fell on the ground?
Smashed onto the ground.
Do they smash when they
smash
into the ground?
They smash into pieces, fairly large pieces, but these can't be broken under normal conditions.
Right, but the ghost can break them.
But they break it
You can't.
when they move of their own violation.
That's very worrying. The guests in the front part of the restaurant remain out of the line of fire. For the Brunswick was once 2 rooms, and the flying saucers, and indeed flying pans, stay in the back room, never passing through the long demolished dividing wall. Psychic experts believe it's all Beryl's fault. Beryl is the proprietor's wife, and occult opinion believes her to be sensitive to elemental forces. Mike Wilde is still sceptical. But the regulars of Gourmet Night at the Brunswick have seen the troubled entity at work and are convinced.
The proprietor there put a cup and saucer onto the dresser there to have a cup of coffee. Then he realised there was no coffee in the percolator, so he's gone in the kitchen to get a cup of coffee. While he's in the kitchen, I saw the cup literally lift off the dresser, 2 feet up in the air, come down and float clean.
And where was the nearest person to that cup?
There was no one near the cup and saucer at all. I was the nearest person that was sitting just over there.
How far away?
I should say roughly about 10 foot.
Did you see this as well?
I saw exactly the same thing, except that prior to the happening, I heard a vibration.
What sort of vibration?
It could have been the sound that an old-fashioned treble sewing machine makes. That's the sort of noise that it reminded me of.
Sort of steady rattling.
A steady rattling.
And then you saw the cup going up into the air?
Yes, and it elevated and sort of veered over and then went crashing into the floor.
Now, you also saw a psychic manifestation. What happened?
Well, we was just sitting eating our meal, waiting for the suite to come, and we looked over at the door where the bar is.
Yes.
And an ashtray just lifted and went very slowly, and then just fell and hit the bottom of the door. There was nobody else near it at all.
Did you see it as well?
Yes, definitely. It really surprised me because normally if an ashtray falls off the corner of the counter, you expect it to fall straight down. But this one just seemed to travel about 1'6" and then straight down, you know. It seemed to travel just like that.
How slowly?
Well, how would you say slowly? I suppose if you're looking at my hand, it would go something like that, you know. And then fell straight down instead of just normally falling over.
Despite his scepticism, Mike Wilde has allowed the Reverend Barclay, a local minister, to perform 2 exorcisms in the restaurant in order to bounce the rowdy guest. But the visitation without a reservation is still there, and as far as the customers are concerned, it is not an added attraction.
There are no roads to Dunstanburgh Castle. You can't get there unless you're prepared to walk. It stands on a lonely promontory high up on the Northumbrian coast, a bleak and a rather desolate ruin with a strange history. You see, there's a curse on Dunstanburgh Castle, a curse of ill fortune, bad luck. Throughout the centuries, its owners have all been born losers. There was Thomas, 2nd Earl of Lancaster. He built the castle back in 1313. He made the mistake of opposing King Edward II and got his head chopped off for his pains. Then the king himself took it over for a while, and as you probably know, he came to a rather nasty end in Berkeley Castle. At the end of the 14th century, the owner was Henry of Bolingbroke, who took over the throne of England as Henry IV. He was one of the lucky ones. He died peacefully in bed. But by the time the Wars of the Roses came along, the Dunstanburgh curse was back again. The man in charge in those days was Sir Ralph Percy, who started out supporting the Lancastrians. He was a bit of a shrewie, was old Percy. It didn't take him long to realize that he'd opted for the losing side. So being a realist, he simply switched sides and joined the Yorkists. A year later, he had another change of heart, did a double cross, and switched back again. That was his big mistake. Dunstanburgh fell to York in 1464. And that, in fact, was the end of Dunstanburgh as a castle. It was the last time anyone bothered with it. Apart from Henry VIII, that is, and he was more interested in what he could use from it than in fixing it up. For the past 500 years, it's remained a romantic ruin, far enough from civilization to be a safe refuge for a wide variety of seabirds, and too remote to be visited by more than a handful of tourists. But it did receive one visit, and an extraordinary one, just a few centuries ago. It was a wild, stormy night, the kind of storm you only get on this particular stretch of coastline. A gentleman called Sir Guy took refuge here. Even in those days, the place was in ruins. He tethered his horse outside and found himself confronted by a strange apparition, a figure all in black, which beckoned him in. He was led into a large room, and there, in the center of the floor, was a beautiful maiden, encased in a block of pure crystal. And all around, asleep in full armor, with hideous, grisly faces, were 100 knights. In the corner, their chargers, huge, terrifying beasts, more like dragons than horses, all asleep. And hanging on the wall, side by side, a sword and a hunting horn. The strange figure told Sir Guy to choose one or the other. Make the right choice, he was told, and he would free the maiden from her crystal tomb. Well, Sir Guy chose the horn. It seemed the least warlike. Immediately, it blew a note all on its own. A note so high and shrill that it seemed to lift the top off Sir Guy's skull. The knights on the ground sprang to life. They leapt to their feet, fire and smoke belching from their nostrils. Their chargers neighed and pawed the earth. The noise was like thunder. It shook the ground for miles around. Well, Sir Guy didn't wait any longer. He turned and tore off across the moor. He came back next morning, but he could find no trace of the room or the knights, or his own horse which he'd left outside. They say his ghost still wanders around, looking for that horse and for the maiden encased in crystal. Well, that's the way they tell it in the little villages along the coast. But then, every castle has its ghost story, and I suppose you've just got to take them all with a pinch of salt. I almost forgot to tell you, there is another version of that story. In the second version, Sir Guy chooses the sword and not the horn. And what do you think? The same thing happens. The knights spring up, the horses paw the ground, and off he tears across the moor. It looks as though poor old Sir Guy, like everyone else at Dunstanburgh Castle, was just a born loser.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share to keep fascinating content coming here at Nightmare Nexus.